Hello, and welcome to another Game Nexus Mame review. Today we're going to be taking a look at Space Harrier, released in 1985. This is actually released on the Sega Space Harrier hardware, as they called it at the time.
Welcome to the fantasy zone. Get ready.
A lot of times when these games actually were released on a hardware that they were more or less made for, a lot of times they will name it after that game, because I would imagine when they first make these games, they don't think, oh, we're going to put another game on this board. They just think, well, let's make this cool arcade game, and then later on, of course, the board gets repurposed for another game. But in all the things I've seen, this is just called Space Harrier hardware. But yeah, Space Harrier was a basically on-rail shooter released in 1985 by Sega. At this point, it's kind of an arcade legend how great this game is. And I have to admit something here. I never really played Space Harrier a lot until when I played Shenmue on Dreamcast, and it was an available minigame in there. And of course, since it was the big minigame, I played it a lot on Shenmue on Dreamcast. So that was really cool. And I always thought to myself, it's just really cool to actually have a game where you can actually go to an arcade and play games in the game. And now, what's cool about this arcade game is it actually was released in 3 different versions. As opposed to most games, which came as a upright and deluxe, this came as the sit-down cabinet, which was more or less just a sit-down version where you had your controls and you played the game. Then there was the more deluxe unit, which was called the rolling type, which actually moved, kind of like, well, probably not to the extreme of Afterburner, but it had a lot of motion. And then, of course, there was just the plain old upright type, which you just stood at the cabinet, used your control stick and your fire buttons and played the game. And now this game was released in October of 1985 in Japan. And a lot of people called this the pioneer 3D shooting game realized by high-speed 3D processing. The first full-color CG graphics in Japan and beautiful BGM, supported by a FM stereo sound that gave a great impact to the arcade scene in 1985. And now this game got a ton of ports, so I'm going to go through a bunch of them here. Now, the Sega Mark III, which was the Sega Master System in Japan, got a release on December 21st of 1986. Then you had your United States Master System released in 1987, and your, let me see here, and your European release in August of 1987. There was a port to the NEC PC engine, which of course is the Japanese TurboGrafx, in Japan, December 9th of 1988. There was a Japanese Famicom release, which was on the, of course, the Famicom being the NES here in the USA, released January 6th of 1989. And then, that following year, for the TurboGrafx 16 in America, you got your Space Harrier release in 1990. Then, of course, the ports stopped for the consoles at least until 1994 with the 32X and Sega Mega 32X port in Japan. Well, I'm sorry, Mega Drive 32X was the European version, and then Sega Super 32X is the Japanese version, released on December 3rd of 1994.
Get ready.
And then in 1996, there were 2 different releases. There's the standard standalone Sega Ages Space Harrier release on Sega Saturn, and then there was the Space Harrier Limited Special Set with the gray mission stick. Both of those were released on July 19th of 1996. And then, of course, in, I believe it was 1999, but don't quote me on this, Space Harrier had that port on Shenmue, And then Yu Suzuki released something called the Yu Suzuki GameWorks Volume 1 on December 20th of 2001 for the Dreamcast, which included Space Harrier. There was the Space Harrier Sega Ages 2500 Volume 4, released on PlayStation 2 on September 25th of 2003. And then, of course, the sequel got its own Sega Ages 2500 release in 2005, October 27th to be exact. And now one thing I definitely have to say about this part of the game is it might look easy, but these poles, in my opinion, when I played this, were so hard to avoid. It's just amazing how hard they were to avoid. So you might think I'm really sucking here, but
You're doing great.
although the voice thinks I'm doing great. Now there's a couple other minor quote-unquote emulation releases. In 2009, in all three regions, the Wii Virtual Console release was released. And then in, 2009, for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, in Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, or the Sega Mega Drive Ultimate Collection in
You're doing great.
in Europe, this was an unlockable extra, so you didn't have this, like, in the beginning. Now, there was a number of actual handheld releases for Sega Game Gear in 1991 in all three regions. Space Harrier was released. And then in 2012 and 2013, the 3DS eShop had a release of 3D Space Harrier. Now, there was a few computer releases of this. You had your Amstrad CPC release in 1986, Sharp X68000 in 1987, Commodore C64 in 1987, Fujitsu FM7 in 1987, the Fujitsu FM77AV in 1987, Sinclair ZX Spectrum in 1987, and Atari ST in 1988. Then there was a Commodore Amiga in 1989, the PC-DOS version in 1989, and it looks like sometime after that, it doesn't have actual data here, there was a NEC PC 8801 and Sharp X1 release of this game. Of course, just like with everything, there was also a Tiger handheld LCD game of this, released sometime in the 80s or the 90s. Unfortunately, there's no data of that in the MameHistory.net. And then in the US, we got a mobile phone release of this in 2002, which is actually kind of surprising to really think about it. A game so old, but it's one of those things. A lot of times with, like, your mobile phones, especially before smartphones became, like, very prevalent, these older games became a really easy thing to port because you could have basically this simple game as you considered at the time, and you could port it to a phone, and people are like, "Wow, that's amazing," even though it really wasn't much. And just in case you're wondering, this game has a total of 18 stages, each with a boss at the end, with the exception of the bonus stages, which are 5 and 12. And the 18th stage, which is a boss rush, featuring some of the bosses encountered up to that point.
Get ready.
Now, I definitely have to say, as it gets, like, later in the game here, it really gets hard, in my opinion.
You're doing great.
And no matter what you do, that guy says that you're doing great. So, you can't do any wrong in his eyes. And now this game was developed by Sega AM2, Sega AM4, Denpa Elite System, and Rutubo Games, published by various publishers.
Get ready.
Well, these are all like all your developers for your various versions, and then it's been published by Sega, Denpa,
Get ready.
Microsoft, Takara, NEC, and Elite Systems, and Mindscape. Of course, the designer of this game was Yu Suzuki, and the composer of the music was Hiroshi Kawaguchi. And the cool part about the arcade system is it wasn't actually the most complicated hardware, but I'd imagine at the time it was probably quite a feat.
Get ready.
You basically had two 68,000 processors running at 10 megahertz. For sound, you had a Z80 running at 4 megahertz. Or, of course, if you live in some of the European countries or Canada, you'd say it's a Z80. Then there was the YM2203 at 4 megahertz and a Sega PCM running at 31.25 megahertz.
You're doing great.
So, in today's standards, it's a rather simple arcade system, but in 1985, you know, this kind of arcade game was actually quite revolutionary. It was really amazing when you think about it, how complex this really was when you look at it. Because up to this time, a lot of the arcade games basically would just be a character going across an area in a horizontal way. This was one of the first big games to really have like a 3D perspective, if you will. Even if it is like sprites just getting smaller and larger to make it look like you're in a 3D area when, you know, you're really not.
You're doing great.
But as you can see, it goes without saying this is an excellent game, and I would highly recommend any version of Space Harrier. And in the videos coming after this one, which I will say they're coming right after this, as I might have something else after this, I will be looking at some of the other versions of Space Harrier, as I have a few versions of Space Harrier on some other systems myself, which would namely be the Master System version,
Get ready.
the PlayStation 2 Sega Ages version, and the Sega Saturn version. I'll be looking at those. I don't know if they'll be in separate videos or if I'll just have one video with multiple releases. And the cool part is in Japan, the 3D Space Harrier port, instead of just being in the that eShop, you got what was called the Sega 3D
Get ready.
Fukoku Archives, which actually was on a game card. So if you wanted like a physical release, you could actually have this and several other Sega games in 3D on the 3DS, which was really cool. So instead of having to buy a digital game, it's really cool, and I think that's a really good idea. And if you're wondering, the Virtual Console release for the Wii was actually the arcade version. It wasn't like any of the ports, which, hearing that, I think it's actually really good, because I'm not a fan of like when they do one of those like virtual releases of a game,
Get ready.
and they actually just go cheap with it and port one of the console versions. And I can remember when I actually did that part where those three things came up and hit me, I was like, what are those things? And then I just realized they're like the trees or pillars for this level.
Get ready.
And whenever I play this game at length, I always hear that guy saying, like, get ready in my head all the time, because it's one of the most prevalent sounds through the whole game that you hear.
Get ready.
But yeah, as I said before, Space Harrier is an excellent game. It's one of those games that, honestly, every time I play this game, I just get a smile on my face, because it's just one of those enjoyable experiences. Even if you haven't played this game when you were younger, or if you were like me and you really didn't play it at length until you played it on the Sega Dreamcast in the game Shenmue, I would highly recommend giving Space Harrier a try, because it's a really fun game, and it's just that, like, crazy arcade action all the way, and it's definitely a game that's worth playing. Because it just has that action that you crave from a game, where you have to be, like, on your toes all the time, and you can't just sit back and expect the game to play. But here's the second bonus stage. And both these levels kind of make me think of the Never-Ending Story for some reason, but who knows, maybe that movie got inspiration from this game. But this has been another Game Nexus Mame review. And the funny part about this is I didn't realize it in the first one, but your whole point here is to destroy the pillars or the trees. But this has been another Game Nexus Mame review, and I shall see you later. Bye.